Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. This is The Excerpt. Today, a deeper look at Trump and Netanyahu's meeting and what Trump said about the future of Gaza, plus an update on federal employees accepting Trump's buyout offer, and disabled federal workers feel the White House is targeting them. President Donald Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday at the White House, and in a news conference following their talk, Trump said the U.S. should take over Gaza. I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers for more. Francesca, thank you so much for carving out some time for me on this.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor.
So, President Trump had some strong words, Francesca, about the future of Gaza. Let's take a listen.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
So, Francesca, how surprising were these remarks? What does he actually mean by them if we kind of read between the lines? And I guess just what was the reaction like in the room when he said this?
Well, Taylor, they came under immediate criticism from Democratic lawmakers, and even some experts that I spoke to in the region said that they had never heard of a proposal like this before. And even one Republican who I spoke to, Taylor, said it was the last thing that they expected from Donald Trump because he represents, in many ways, a desire to get the United States less involved in places like the Middle East. In terms of what he means by it, it wasn't entirely clear because he said that the U.S. would take it over. He also talked about the United States owning Gaza. And it also wasn't clear if this was something that he had run by Arab leaders. He indicated that he's been in conversation with both Egypt and Jordan about relocating Palestinians to those areas, but whether or not he had talked with them about the United States managing Gaza afterwards, that was very unclear.
Okay, so were there any other aspects of either the ceasefire or Gaza's future that the pair discussed or that stood out to you from the news conference, Francesca?
What was expected to be on the schedule, Taylor, was a discussion about the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, which is still in its first phase, and it would need to be negotiated to get into the second phase, where you would see the release of additional hostages, as well as a third phase that would include the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, that last phase called for a 3 to 5 year reconstruction, but senior officials in the Trump administration had said earlier in the day that they expected it to take much longer, that it would be 10 to 15 years, and that Trump was looking for solutions that would allow the more than 2 million Palestinians who currently live there to live as normal lives as possible. This wasn't the first time that we heard Trump talk about relocating the Palestinians who are currently in Gaza. He said in January that it was a demolition site, and he proposed just cleaning that whole thing out. He said then that the territory's residents could be relocated temporarily or long term. But yesterday was the first time that we heard additional details on how he envisions that going.
Francesca, we've heard ideas about this two-state solution for really generations, and in comes Trump with new ideas about this proposal in terms of the future of Gaza. Does this represent a major shift from kind of past U.S. policy, I guess?
Trump is rewriting U.S. foreign policy in a major way. The U.S. has, for a very long time, supported a two-state solution that would involve an independent Palestinian state. And including in his first administration, his proposal for Middle East peace included a two-state solution. But Trump seemed to back off of that position on Tuesday when he spoke to reporters, saying one state, two states, that what he thought the people who live in the Middle East, as well as the Palestinians, wanted was to have peace in the region. Now, something else that he also talked about, speaking to reporters in the Oval Office before the news conference, Trump said that a lot of plans change with time. And he said that a lot of death has occurred since I left and now I came back.
Well, Francesca, we also saw President Trump sign a memo yesterday authorizing more aggressive measures toward Iran. What does that move mean? And did that come up during this meeting? We, of course, know Iran and Israel are state adversaries.
That was one of the expected topics between Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. And as he signed that executive order, Trump said he didn't want to authorize more sanctions against Iran and that indeed he hoped a deal could be made, but he said that their nuclear program has to be stopped.
All right. Francesca Chambers is a White House correspondent with USA Today. Thank you, Francesca.
Thanks, Taylor.
At least 20,000 federal employees have accepted the buyout offer President Donald Trump made to the entire federal workforce before tomorrow's deadline, according to a White House official yesterday. That represents about 1% of the more than 2 million federal employees, below the White House's goal for 5 to 10% to accept buyouts. Still, the White House official said the number of deferred resignations is rapidly growing, and the White House expects the largest spike in sign-ups to come 24 to 48 hours before the deadline. In a push to drastically reduce the size of the federal workforce, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management last Tuesday offered all federal employees 8 months of pay and benefits through September if they resign by February 6th. The offer is part of billionaire Elon Musk's efforts to gut the federal bureaucracy and reshape the government through the Department of Government Efficiency he leads. Federal employees who want to remain in the federal workforce were told via email they must return to in-person work, embrace new performance standards, and be reliable, loyal, and trustworthy in their work. The email also warned that most federal departments and agencies will be downsized through restructurings, realignments, and reductions in force. Layoffs across the federal government are likely if not enough employees take the buyout. President Trump blamed last week's air crash on the Federal Aviation Administration's hiring of disabled Americans. In a news conference, Trump claimed the agency was actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities and psychiatric problems and other mental and physical conditions under diversity and inclusion hiring initiatives. The remarks, made without evidence, set off anxiety and frustration among federal employees with disabilities. I spoke with USA Today's senior reporter Jessica Gwynn for more. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, Taylor. How are you?
I am good. Thanks for hopping on this. So, what are some of the specific fears, Jessica, really, as it pertains to potential losses in job opportunities for the disabled community?
Well, for decades, the federal government has prided itself and worked to be a model employer of disabled Americans who have historically faced very high rates of unemployment and high levels of on-the-job discrimination. Presidents of both parties have tried to remedy this by prioritizing the hiring of disabled Americans and military veterans, helping qualified workers land jobs they might not have. So, disability advocates warn that if that career path is cut off, it could lead to huge losses in job opportunities for disabled Americans. And they're very quick to remind us that everyone is likely to be disabled at some point in their life, especially as the population ages. Right now, more than 1 in 4 American adults has a disability.
A lot of folks might be surprised by that number, Jessica. We know President Trump has really gone after remote work, right, as it relates to federal employees. It's been a huge focus of these first couple weeks in office. Why is this a point of anxiety for many disabled workers?
Well, many federal employees with disabilities rely on flexible work arrangements to perform their duties. They say working from home helps them manage stress and chronic conditions, adjust to their office environment, such as not having to sit under fluorescent lights or having the privacy they need to manage their medical needs. They're also able to avoid commutes on public transportation or driving that can exacerbate their health problems. I spoke with a former combat medic in the Army who told me he's really afraid he will lose his job with the Department of Veterans Affairs that allows him to care for his fellow soldiers and also his own family. And he says he suffers from PTSD from his time serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, which makes it impossible for him to go into the office.
Jessica, you mentioned Schedule A employees in this piece. I was not familiar with this term. Can you help us understand who Schedule A workers are and what they're feeling in this moment?
Well, Schedule A is a hiring authority that federal agencies use to expedite the hiring process, and it also allows them to tap into a diverse talent pool that includes military veterans and other workers with disabilities. One disabled employee I spoke with said he was hired that way in 2 weeks, which is lightning fast for the federal government. The agency in that case chose to take that route because there were very few candidates qualified for the position. A number of disabled employees like him are now worried because the Office of Personnel Management, which oversees the civilian workforce, directed all agency heads to turn over a list of staffers who are on probation. Among them is a disabled Forest Service employee who was hired under Schedule A after years of seasonal work. And she says she's just 5 months from achieving her dream of being a career federal employee. And she's not the only one in her office. And she said the stress levels there are just off the charts.
Wow. So for disabled workers, Jessica, who feel President Trump is targeting them, do they have any recourse? What's next for them?
They say they feel essentially powerless and they can only wait and see what happens. But their morale is very low. A couple of them told me that they read an article back in October about these private, previously unreported speeches that Trump's nominee for the Office of Management and Budget gave, in which he said one of his top goals was to put career civil servants in trauma. They told me he's succeeding.
Wow. Well, folks can find Jessica's full piece with a link in today's show notes. Jessica Gwynn is a senior reporter with USA Today. And Jessica, I always appreciate your insight and reporting work. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks so much for having me, Taylor.
About 10,000 employees of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, excluding essential personnel, were notified yesterday they will be placed on administrative leave at the end of Friday as President Trump moves to dismantle the foreign aid agency. A State Department notice to USAID employees, 2/3 of whom work overseas across 60 countries, said all USAID direct hire personnel across the world will be placed on administrative leave effective at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time Friday night. The only exception is for designated personnel responsible for so-called mission-critical functions, core leadership, and specially designated programs. The State Department is working on a plan to arrange and pay for the return of USAID employees living overseas back to the U.S. within 30 days and to terminate contracts not deemed essential. The mass terminations come as Trump and his administration have worked to shut down the foreign aid agency and merge it into the State Department. The number of tiny bits of plastic found in human brains increased dramatically between 2016 and 2024, with the highest amounts found in the brains of people who had dementia. By last year, the average brain studied by scientists at the University of New Mexico contained the equivalent of one plastic throwaway spoon, about 7 grams worth. That's according to Dr. Matthew Campen, a toxicologist and professor of pharmaceutical sciences at the university and lead author of the study published this week in the journal Nature Medicine. While human livers and kidneys also showed increases, the concentrations in brains were 7 to 30 times greater, the study found. There was also a higher concentration of micro and nanoplastic particles in the brains of people with a documented dementia diagnosis than in those without. The research highlights growing concerns about the level of microplastics in the environment, which are increasingly being found in the human body. For more on this topic, check out our special deep dive episode into microplastics. We have a link in today's show notes. From the civil rights movement to MAGA, from LGBTQ rights to the moral majority, America is no stranger to social dissent. But what makes a movement countercultural?
To the extent we have a society which, on some level, creates space for dissent, there will always be countercultures that refuse to be co-opted by the mainstream.
Alex Hamlin, the author of the recently released title Counterculture, the story of America from Bohemia to hip-hop, explores this question and more in a conversation with my colleague Dana Taylor. Hear their talk right here on this feed beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time today. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.